Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. I'm the Diggly Doodah, Doc Mr. Slippers, the Papatoe Panther, here to talk through all sorts of rugby league matters. The Aotearoa Warriors, they lost to the Parramatta Eels. Jersey Flegg and Canterbury Cup reserve grade Warriors both had victories though, so it's an up and down week for the Warriors. We also have all NRL women's squads finalised. So I'm going to briefly touch on that from a Kiwi NRL wahine perspective, and then I've got a couple of talking points, just a couple of bits of insight with regards to the wider NRL, of course, from our standard Kiwi NRL perspective. If you're listening to this, shout out to you. Thank you for supporting the Niche Cache and supporting the Niche Cast. We've got a Patreon page if you want to donate to the Niche Cache if you love us that much. Otherwise, just like, subscribe, rate and review. Support us in any which way possible. Always appreciate a cheeky comment, especially on YouTube. We had Grim Reminder. Shout out to you. That's a good little username, that one, Grim Reminder. Shout out to Nelson, South Island, Rugby League. Rugby League is increasing in popularity in the South Island, especially with regards to where NRL clubs are recruiting players from. There is, just to a slither of information here, there's a guy, I think it is Jordan Ricky, he is from the Canterbury region, and he is with the Brisbane Broncos. And then there's another guy, Rory Ferguson, he is from the Deep South, and he is also signed to the Broncos. Both those dudes that no one ever talks about because no one knows are playing reserve grade footy, despite both being, I think, Jersey Flegg eligible, and I suspect they're going to break through into the Broncos top tier soon enough. But that's just a small example about how the South Island is growing in terms of NRL contributions, and that of course stems from having the Grim Reminder commented up on the YouTube. Shout out to the South Island, and shout out to anyone listening to this. We appreciate your love, appreciate your aroha, and we're just out here trying to offer alternative options in the Kiwi sporting landscape. Big it up, big it up. The Warriors, they were defeated by the Parramatta Eels, and this is a game that's receiving a lot of attention because of these NRL referees. And the best place to start this discussion is to say that the NRL referees are a bit weird. Like they are a bit weird. They're not overly amazing at their job, and that the same goes for everyone. I don't think the Warriors are hard done by specifically. I think people like to think that the Warriors are hard done by, in the sense that it's the New Zealand team. You get all the conspiracies and those type of things, like the NRL hating on the Warriors. But ultimately, the NRL would benefit greatly from having the Warriors exceptionally strong in the NRL. So if anyone's talking to you about how the NRL has this conspiracy against the Warriors always get shit refereeing decisions go against them. If anyone's coming at you with that kind of angle, business-wise, that makes no sense, because the NRL is trying to, it's got a huge Australian following, as we know, but the New Zealand market's still a bit untapped. And if the Warriors are hugely successful, that just opens all sorts of doors for the NRL to, just in terms of profit margins and interest and popularity of the NRL. And if the Warriors continue to be successful in the NRL, then you can look at other business opportunities in New Zealand. So it's just a bit weird, any conspiracies against the Warriors. And I haven't written about this game yet because I found the angle, but it's just at that time you just need to let it sit, because I just don't want to come out here and talk about referees. Like, referees are the most uninteresting thing to talk about because they're always pretty mediocre, especially in the NRL, and it's the same for everyone. It's just a very lazy, easy talking topic. And so I've just got to come up with other angles, other little pieces of insight. And I kind of said it, I did wonder if the Warriors, because there was a lopsided penalty count, the Warriors that isn't like, you can't say that because of a lopsided penalty count the Warriors were screwed, because the Warriors may not have been the most disciplined team in that game. The Warriors, according to Fox Sports stats, the Warriors average 6 penalties conceded, and the Eels average 5.3 penalties conceded. So there's not a huge... The Eels are 16th in penalties conceded per game, average penalties conceded per game. So they concede the least amount of penalties. Now, there's not a great disparity between the Eels in the 16th spot and the Penrith Panthers. So the Eels concede average 5.3 penalties per game. Penrith Panthers concede on average 7.9. So it's not a huge disparity, but what it does tell you is the Parramatta Eels concede the least amount of penalties per game in the NRL. So it makes sense that the Eels are going to concede less penalties than their opposition. Again, the margins, like, that's not a foolproof kind of analysis, but it just paints the picture. It just helps you understand that this isn't some grand conspiracy, or that the Warriors were overly hard done by. We are 18 rounds deep, maybe even more. What are we dealing with here? Who knows? I'm all over the show. We are 19 rounds deep into the NRL season, and the Parramatta Eels average the least amount of penalties per game. So of course the Parramatta Eels are going to concede fewer penalties than their opposition, especially the Warriors, who, to be fair against the Warriors, as someone who watches and understands the Warriors closely, and that's pretty much my job, the Warriors wrestle the fuck out of their opposition. That's a huge part of their game plan, is getting guys on their back, having numbers in the tackle. This is a Stephen Kearney signature, is the emphasis placed on defensively wrestling. Like, that's a Melbourne Storm kind of ethos, and I don't think the Warriors are as good as the Melbourne Storm at that job, and I think the Warriors are still kind of adjusting in a bigger picture sense to that style of footy, and the Warriors do concede, penalties. The Warriors also, now, in that game, this is just a weird concept that I've been thinking about, because I was watching, especially when that game was in the balance, the last 15-10 minutes, the Warriors weren't winning the battle of territory. They weren't winning the battle of, generating tempo. The Eels had Nathan Brown bursting onto the footy, making big meters and plays like that, whereas the Warriors were shoveling the footy to Ken Mamala, who runs into 3 defenders, slow play the ball, next play the ball, slow play the ball. The Warriors, it took that moment from Roger Tuivasa-Sheck, a little moment of magic and brilliance with the forward pass that was disallowed, the forward pass that led to a try that was disallowed. But other than that, the Warriors just weren't generating like a momentum. They weren't generating. It didn't feel like the Warriors were actually going to win that game, because territory-wise, quick play the ball-wise, they weren't doing anything, and they did manage to shift it out to the edges where players have more space and they can be one-on-one with their defender. So I talk about all that because it just feels like you generate your own. What am I trying to say here? You don't make your own luck, because if you're conceding penalty, it's not like a luck decision. It's just what it is. But Parramatta Eels were on top when it mattered most, and the Warriors were not. And I think that does, in an airy-fairy way, play a role here. Because in like UFC, if it's not a fight that's won by KO or TKO, or a fight that gets finished and it goes to the scorecards, and I think it's similar in boxing, it's about who's the aggressor, who's making the more aggressive moves. It's not who is doing the fanciest stuff. It's about who is winning the tactical battle in that fight and who is pushing their opponent back. And that's what it felt like the Parramatta Eels were doing to the Warriors. The Warriors hung in there. They played a good game of footy, and I'll speak on that in a second. But it just feels like you have to earn penalties. You have to run hard and really try and get a quick play the ball, and someone just hangs on a bit too long, then you earn the penalty. If you're making 5 meters a run, you're not going to get that penalty. And if you're being dominated in the tackle, you're not going to win the penalty. Those type of things, I do believe, come into this picture, this idea, and I just don't think the Warriors earned the right to have an even penalty count, if that makes sense. So especially when the game was in the balance, the Warriors didn't make their own luck. The Warriors didn't match the Eels physically, skillfully. They fell short, and they were in the game. They were there. They were there when it mattered most. But you have to generate your own momentum. You have to generate your own ability to earn penalties and get on the good side of the referees, and show aggressive and dominant elements of your play that influence the referee's decision. And I didn't see any of that from the Warriors. When the game was on the line, they were being dominated. They were being driven back. They were running into multiple defenders and getting slow play the balls. And that's why the Eels won. So I don't really care for the referee decisions or the disparity in the penalty count or just stuff like that. I just think, and if we take that idea to a bigger picture, the Warriors are here again on the fringe of the top 8, and so the same idea applies to a season-long kind of context. In that game against the Parramatta Eels, the Warriors didn't earn the momentum. They didn't earn through dominating their opponent and being the more aggressive team. Throughout the season, the Warriors haven't earned anything. They're there on the fringes of the top 8 where they always are, and they leave these sorts of games and they leave these sorts of decisions and the sort of big moments of their season, they leave it up to chance because they're never on a roll. They're not winning multiple games back to back to put themselves into the top 8. They're always up and down, hovering around the top 8, and then it becomes a case of, a couple of decisions went against us, and now we've got another mediocre season. So throughout the whole season in 2019, this season, the Warriors haven't done enough to get that little slice of luck in key moments. They've fumbled their way through the season, win-loss, loss-loss, win-loss, and just a whole bunch of mediocre performances. That's why they are in this position. The Warriors, you can't complain about referees when you're putting yourself in the position where games are decided by referees, or your season is decided by referees. If you're letting that happen, that's your fault. That's your problem. So I don't really have a whole lot of sympathy for the Warriors or Warriors fans, and I just you just got to get on with it. You just got to be better. You can't really rip into the referees when you're not putting your best foot forward, I should say, because on the flip side of that, this Warriors team is still doing all right. Like, granted, their recent draw hasn't been overly difficult, and it's about to get a whole lot more difficult, starting with that game against Parramatta Eels. But you go back to, so round 13, they got defeated by 22 points by the Melbourne Storm. Warriors 10 points, Melbourne Storm 32 points. Then they went to Gold Coast. They won a game by 4 points. That's pretty good. Then they lost to Penrith Panthers by 1 point. Then they defeated the Newcastle Knights by 4 points. They drew with the Brisbane Broncos, 18-all. They defeated Cronulla Sharks by 1 point. They lost to Parramatta Eels by 2 points. So these are the biggest margin in that string of games is 4 points. So that's kind of positive for the Warriors. Like, they're in these games, they're in these contests. They're not getting defeated by 12, 16, 18, 22 points as they did with the Melbourne Storm and as they had previously, because you go back to round 11, 2 points to 8, lost to the Broncos. Defeated by the Newcastle Knights, 18 points to 36. Those type of results aren't happening now. The Warriors are in much closer games, And in those closer games, you're going to have a lot more influence from the referees. That's for starters, because you're not able to get on top of the opposition and nullify the factor that is referees. It is good, though, that the Warriors are in these contests. They're there. They're thereabouts. They've got a chance to win games. They aren't getting touched up by their opposition. But then Penrith Panthers are in 7th spot. The Knights, Broncos... so the Parramatta Eels in 6th. Penrith Panthers, 1 point loss to them. They're in 7th. Brisbane Broncos, draw with them. They're in 8th. Newcastle Knights, a win over them recently. They're in 9th. Cronulla Sharks, they're in 10th. Warriors are in 12th. So they have had those close games, margins of 4 points or less against teams between 6th and 10th. Sharks, Knights, Broncos, Panthers, Eels. None of those teams are in the upper echelon. So it tells you whereabouts the Warriors fit, because they currently sit in 12th. They're on 17 points. Broncos are in 8th on 19 points. And the Warriors are just in that zone. Even all the way up to the Parramatta Eels in 6th spot, who are on 22 points. The Warriors have had close results against those teams on the fringes of the top 8, because the Warriors are that type of team. They are a team sitting on the fringes of the top 8. So on the one hand, it's good that the Warriors aren't getting blown out in these games. On the other hand, you want the Warriors to be winning those games and winning all of them to just blow away their opposition and get into the top 8. So just a weird situation for the Warriors. There's nothing in their performances to suggest that they will be a factor in the top 8. They can get into the top 8 and maybe catch some momentum, but they are playing the Canberra Raiders next. After that, you got Manly Seagulls. After that, you got Sydney Roosters. Then you got Cronulla Sharks. Then you got Rabbitohs. And you got Raiders again. All those games shouldn't really be won by the Warriors. It doesn't feel like those. They are coming up against good opposition in this run into the finals, and that's an issue, because the Warriors in this period just gone, the last 4 or 5 weeks, the Warriors couldn't defeat the teams in their cluster. Now, they do have one game against the Sharks, but now they are coming into the back end of the season and they have games against the teams in the upper echelon of the NRL. And there's little to suggest in recent weeks, or anything that we have seen from the Warriors this season, that they will be able to get into the top 8, because it's just stylistic stuff and game plan stuff. They don't, they just don't dominate their opposition. They don't play with enough freedom to score a whole heap of points, and their defense isn't good enough. It's just generally ho-hum. But we just wait and see. We keep it moving forward. Wait to see what the Warriors can do, because you never know. Warriors reserve grade. They defeated the Wentworthville Magpies. And in terms of team selection, Cole Walker came into the centres. Api Pefarangi came into the halves because Adam Kieran went up to the NRL team. You had Tyler Slade starting at hooker, and then Sean Mullaney came off the bench. I've talked a lot about that rotation in recent weeks, just the balance of what they're up to. King Vuriyayawa was back this week as well. He was far less effective compared to last week, but he's still on that bench for the reserve grade Warriors, which is a nice little boost for Vuriyayawa at this stage in his career. And the most dominant players for the Warriors, they scored 30 points. Wentworthville Magpies scored 22 points. Chris Sate, 19 runs, 256 meters. What the fuck? 3 line breaks. Chris Sate was just on fire. 10 tackle busts. You kind of got to wonder why he's not getting runs off the bench. The Warriors need a forward like Chris Sate, someone who's got size, they're mobile, they just run hard. The Warriors forwards are all very, very similar in the NRL team, but we've seen that Stephen Kearney doesn't really like Chris Sate, doesn't really like Lingy Sao, doesn't really like Levaha Pulu, so they're not playing. They're just spending the whole season in reserve grade, and the Warriors NRL team again settled into mediocrity. But it was good that the reserve grade team got a win, and the Jersey Flegg team also got a win, 34 points to 18. Celestino Ravatamata, the Rotorua Boys High School product, he scored 4 tries, which is a pretty amazing sign for the Warriors as a club. And in terms of team selection, Harley Maynard was a late inclusion onto the wing. There was no Paul Turner, who was named in the halves to partner Sione Moala. Instead, Brody Tamarua moved from the forward pack to play in the halves alongside Moala, and which just shows you the talent and skill that Brody Tamarua has. He looks like a baller. Temple Kalepo started at hooker, so it was good to see him back in reserve grade. And there was also had Junior Pua. He started for the Warriors. Isaiah Vangana started at lock for the Warriors, obviously with Brody Tamarua shifting around. Taniela Otukulo, he went back to the bench. And you had Iliasa Katoa, who's missed the last game or two. He was a late inclusion onto the bench. So good to see the Warriors, reserve grade and Jersey Flegg team getting wins, which is much appreciated. Parramatta Eels, their Jersey Flegg team has Joseph Taipari in the halves. Now he's recently played, I think he might have played 1 or 2 reserve grade games for that Wentworthville Magpies team. Joseph Tapani is another product out of Canterbury. So I was talking about Rory Ferguson being from the deep south of Aotearoa, signed with the Brisbane Broncos. Jordan Ricky is from Canterbury. He is signed with the Brisbane Broncos. Joseph Taipari is straight out of Christchurch, and he is signed to the Parramatta Eels, playing Jersey Flegg footy in the halves, but also dabbling in a bit of reserve grade as well. So just a name to keep an eye on as we move forward. Joseph Taipari looks like an interesting prospect for the Parramatta Eels and Kiwi NRL footy. We had all the NRL women's squads finalised, and there was one player who I was wondering about, just where they fit in and what they were up to with their career as an NRL women's player. And that was Racine McGregor, who was the Kiwi Ferns half, so she's obviously a good half. She played last season with the St. George Illawarra Dragons, but the Dragons signed a whole lot of Broncos, and including in that signing spree was Kimi Ora Ngati, who won the competition with the Broncos last season, so they signed a half. So they didn't really apparently need Racine McGregor, and they had also signed Batil Vit Welsh, who I've talked about in different patches in this podcast, in the Nichecast. She's from Northland, but she was also named in the Jillaroos merit team, so we're still waiting to see whether she wants to represent Aotearoa or Australia. Racine McGregor, she was signed by the Brisbane Broncos, so effectively a swap. Racine McGregor goes from Dragons to Broncos, Kimi Ora Ngati goes from Broncos down to the Dragons. So this is your full NRL woman wahine Kiwi NRL contingent. Rona Peters, Amber Paris Hall, Racine McGregor and Lavinia Gould. They are with the Brisbane Broncos. So Brisbane Broncos have 4 Kiwi NRL wahine. Sydney Roosters, they have Nita Maynard and Kiana Takarangi. 2 Kiwi NRL wahine for the Sydney Roosters. Dragons have Batil Vet Welsh. They have Maitua Fetarika. They have Tuila Fotumawala. They have Kamiora Ngati. And they also have Alexandria Kirui and Ngā Tokoturu Arakua. So that is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Kiwi NRL players for the Dragons. And then the Warriors, they have pretty much obviously their whole squad, except for the 2 Fijians, and then there's another player who's come across from Victoria to join the Warriors. So the Warriors have Billie Jean Ale, she's from Mount Albert, Madison Bartlett from Richmond, Georgia Hale from Richmond, Hani Hirami, she is from the Waikato, Amber Kani, Manuel Marlins, Angelina Liatawa, Otahu, Hilda Mariu, Papakura, Vatanessa Molia Fraser, she is from Richmond, Jules Newman, Mount Albert, Api Nichols, Papakura, Tanaka Jazz Noble Bell, she is from Mount Albert, Aneta Claudia Nuusala from Richmond, Canyon Paul, also from the Waikato, Shante Poko, she's playing with Richmond, but she's from Christchurch, where she played with the Papanui Tigers, Crystal Rota, Papakura, Aishali Smalley, Otahu, Crystal Tamarua, Richmond, Atawhai Tupaya, Papakura, Kathleen Fortin Kiramiti, she is from Papakura as well, and that's it for the Warriors. So seems like fairly similar Kiwi NRL numbers compared to last season. Obviously the big group from the Broncos moving to the Dragons is a interesting note there. And then in terms of new players, apart from that group with the Warriors, they've got a couple of different players from club footy in Auckland, you have Amber Paris Hall. She is a new face on the Kiwi NRL wahine scene. I think she was signed from Richmond. And then Alexandria Kiriwi, who has like a touch rugby background. She, I believe, is the partner of Tuila Fotumawala. They both played for the North Sydney Bears this year, early in the Sydney competition, and she's with the Dragons. So just a bit of an update there for the Kiwi NRL wahine, and that signings tracker is all live on the Niche Cache. Now, in terms of Kiwi NRL notes, I was interested in what Dylan Brown dished up against the Warriors, and I'm impressed. This Dylan Brown kid looks bloody good. He's from Whangarei. Didn't do a whole lot stats-wise. He didn't have any tries. He only had 8 runs for 53 metres, no try assists, just 1 tackle bust, and that's about it. But what Dylan Brown does do when you watch him play is he looks dangerous. And anyone who just naturally looks dangerous running the footy is a player that I make note of and just keep a close eye on them moving forward. Dylan Brown threw the most dummy passes of anyone in this game. He had 4 dummy passes, and no other Eels player had more than 2. Why is that relevant? Because Dylan Brown plays on the left side of the field, and his game is about kind of run first and then see what happens from there. Dylan Brown looks most dangerous when he skips to the outside of his defender, and part of that has to incorporate a dummy pass somewhere, because he's got the footy in 2 hands. He's showing the ball every which way. He's got all the passes like Benji Marshall, but it's just his running instincts that seem very natural, and the ability to throw dummy passes. Like Michael Cheekham has scored some clutch tries this season for the Tigers. Shout out Michael Cheekham. He suffered a pretty ruthless injury against the Knights as well. But Michael Cheekham, he just breaks teams apart. Well, he did for a patch there in the season from dummy passes. And for Dylan Brown, a young player, to show that instinct as well as the instinct of how to run, where to run, he looks just a wee bit more threatening than Mitchell Moses. They play left and right, as a lot of teams do. But I just want to highlight Dylan Brown because I keep seeing bits and pieces of his game that reinforce why Dylan Brown has had such a swift rise of the Parramatta Eels. And you got to think, I think he started last season in SG Ball with the Eels, alongside Joseph Taipiri. There's a video of Dylan Brown receiving a haka when he made his NRL debut. Joseph Taipiri was in that haka as part of the little crew giving Dylan Brown a haka. They both played SG ball with the Parramatta Eels. And now Dylan Brown, like, you can just see why Dylan Brown has had such a quick rise through the Parramatta Eels. Just his instincts running the footy. He looks like a natural number 6, I would say. And I believe Dylan Brown will play a lot of footy for the Kiwis. I think that is going to happen. And I think the depth on display, like, it's going to be interesting. Dylan Brown comes into the picture. What's if Sean Johnson's not playing well? What's if Cody Nikorima is not really shining with the Warriors? Dylan Brown's going to be a factor for the Kiwis. And you can remember where you heard that first. We also had Panthers losing to the Raiders. And I was interested in the battle between James Fisher-Harris and Joseph Tapine, which didn't end up being much of a contest because Fisher-Harris was excellent. But again, in my preview, I outlined two very different scenarios or situations that they have found themselves in. And it just epitomizes what I was talking about, because Joseph Tapine only had to play 37 minutes. He only had to have 8 runs for 72 metres, which is still pretty efficient, still around that 9 metres per run mark. Can't do the math off the top of my head, but around there. Had a couple of tackle busts, 2 tackle busts, an offload, 28 post-contact metres from 8 runs. That's roughly 3 post-contact metres per run. That's a solid, standard Joseph Tapine game. He doesn't have to go above and beyond that when the Raiders have their team as they do right now. Maybe if a couple of forwards were missing, then Joseph Tapine would have to up the ante. But he doesn't have to. The Raiders don't need him to do that. It's just a solid Joseph Tapine game as part of a winning Raiders team. James Fisher-Harris, he's playing 74 minutes. What the fuck? He's putting in marathon stints. I've talked about this consistently over the last few weeks. James Fisher-Harris consistently churns out over 70 minutes in the middle of the field. But this week, James Fisher-Harris added a bit of efficiency to his work. He had 15 runs for 155 metres, which is bloody impressive. 38 post-contact metres. He had a try assist. And that's standard James Fisher-Harris. So again, if we're imagining like a Kiwis context, we're going to be looking at a Kiwis forward pack that has Fisher-Harris and Joseph Tapine in it. Joseph Tapine didn't play versus Tonga. I think he might have played 1, maybe 2 games eventually when the team went to England last year. He was battling injury, so it wasn't part of the whole experience, but he did feature sporadically. But a Kiwis forward pack with Fisher-Harris and Joseph Tapine in it is going to be pretty exciting. So that just shows you the very different scenarios those two forwards have found themselves in, both as middle forwards in the NRL. And hold that idea, Fisher-Harris, Tapine in a Kiwis forward pack, and Melbourne Storm. They lost to the Manly Seagulls 10-11. And this game, I believe, well, I don't believe, it was a golden point effort. And so that means 90 minutes of footy was played, and that means inflated statistics. So lots of running meters, that sort of stuff, as you would expect. But what catches the eye here is Brandon Smith, 18 runs for 156 meters. In 48 minutes of footy, he scored a try. 58 post-contact meters. Brandon Smith had more post-contact meters than Felice Kafusi, Nelson Asafa-Solomona, Jesse Bromwich on a similar amount of runs, which tells you all you need to know about Brandon Smith. He had a line break assist. No, he didn't. Sorry, he had a try assist as a line break. Sorry, and a couple of tackle busts, 3 tackle busts, and what's going on here? Hold up, 3 tackle busts, and that's it. But Brandon Smith, amazing. Amazing. Brandon Smith just continues to impress. He's playing in the middle of the field. He's not even playing hooker. This dude is a monster. Nelson Asafa-Solomona, also a monster. 19 runs, 162 metres. Jesse Bromwich, 17 runs, 153 metres. Of course, these numbers are inflated, so keep that in mind. But what I'm talking about here is a Kiwis forward pack with Fisher Harris, with Joseph Tapine, with Brandon Smith, with Nelson Asafa-Solomona. These dudes are really, really, really good NRL forwards, and of course I'm not mentioning every available young Kiwi forward, but it's just these dudes just catch the eye. They are very classy operators. Asafa-Solomona, Fisher Harris, Brandon Smith, Joseph Tapine, very classy operators, and they've played 2, 3, 4 years of NRL footy, and I think they are just coming into their prime years, and this is going to flow into the Kiwis. So just a bit of Kiwis discussion there. And you got Dylan Brown, and you got Jerome Hughes, Joseph Manu, Issa Masters, Ken Mamalo, Jordan Rapana. All these dudes are quite good at footy. And the depth available for Kiwis is growing and emerging. So just a couple of things to keep an eye on. We will be back later in the week. Of course, Teamless Tuesday is tomorrow, recording this on Monday afternoon. If you enjoyed that episode, just leave a comment, tell us where you're listening, and your support is greatly appreciated. Thank you very much. Support us as you can. Stay beautiful. Be nice to each other. Stay generous and grateful. Don't let all the negative shit in this world drag you down. Just keep your head up. Find what you love to do and do that shit. Don't give that up for anything. Just do what you love to do, and don't be a slave to the money. That's what we're doing. We just do what we love to do. Hopefully it will all work out, and we'll just be able to keep serving up this interesting sporting discussion. Big it up, big cheer to you. Peace and love. Kia